Hello and welcome to Everything's Fine, probably your weekly antidote to all that bad news in the world. I'm joined, as always, by Stuart and Shelley. Hello both, how are you?
Hello there, Jim.
Hello.
Hello.
Hot. Everyone's just hot.
It is just hot, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's all you can really say.
My brain definitely stopped working by about 2 today, and I'm trying to still do important things at work. And it was just like a really busy clinic. But I kept thinking, oh, I think patients might not turn up today because it's so hot. Like, wouldn't you rather go to the beach and go and see, like, go to a hospital appointment?
I'm really pleased we've got people like you looking after us, Shelley.
But they
Means
all
I sleep better at night. We are joined this week by a guest. We love a guest. And this week we have Tom Oxley with us. Hello, Tom.
Hi, thanks for having me in.
Not at all. Thanks for coming along. So, as listeners will know, every so often we like to drag some poor unsuspecting guest on here to talk well-being and health and happiness and all of that good stuff with us. And Tom, obviously that is very much your thing.
Yeah. So I run Bamboo Mental Health, and I'm specifically interested in workplaces. So I'm not medical and I'm not therapeutic. So I'm often wheeled in when somebody in HR or health and safety says, "Oh, there's this thing about mental health that we've all kind of got." I know the stories, and I hear some of the problems, but we don't know what to do, and that's when enter Tom, stage right, and I'll commonly interview people and run surveys and find out what it's like to work for them, and give them some advice on how to support their people better.
Oh, are they anonymous surveys?
Yes, generally.
Oh,
sometimes
I bet you get some really good stuff.
Yeah, I slightly limit the open field questions where
Okay.
people will use it as an opportunity to slag off their employer.
I definitely would.
But that people also say some really helpful stuff and quite incisive stuff. And sometimes they're describing their own sort of stories and how the difficult stuff that happens at work, they take home, they mask, they medicate their relationship problems at work, kind of thing. It's really helpful to play that back to the employer to go, do you know what's actually happening? This is not somebody who's just choosing to be lazy. This is not somebody who's young and lacking resilience or resourcefulness. Stuff is happening here, and you don't want that stuff to be happening. And so sometimes you can really kind of slightly give people the wet fish around the face of what it's really like to work for them. And commonly comments like, "Oh, I just never thought of it like this. I had no idea." And if I can say to them, "Do you know how many people are thinking about hurting themselves in this department?" The stuff, I can sometimes, pull out some quite big boxing gloves, and it hits home.
Wow.
I'd just say, Tom, how did you get involved in this area? Is that something you're passionate about, or how did you sort of begin this journey?
Well, like a lot of people, Stuart, I've got my own story, and I was working in a PR agency. I was burning the candle at both ends, and I thought I was enjoying life, but I was steaming towards a burnout episode, and I'd started to lose my plot. Basically, I know it's a technical term, and I would do things like I'd pick up a piece of paper and I would read it, put it down again, and I couldn't tell you anything that was written on that piece of paper. Or I'd want to go to the loo a lot, and when I arrived there was nothing to give, so to speak. So some weird stuff was happening in my body. I didn't know what was going on, and my managing director said, "Look, I don't know where you're at, Tom, but you're not yourself. Go and get yourself checked out." I went to the doctor. I spoke to my ex-girlfriend's mum. I ended up seeing an ancient counsellor and some rescue therapy.
Yeah.
And that's probably planted all the seeds of this stuff, just wanting to know what to do with this. And my workplace was kind, but they didn't really have a plan. And I had another career in between, and then I started working for a charity where I was reviewing workplaces and how they supported people. And as part of that, I'd interview scores of people who'd experienced poor mental health, and they're just stories. They moved me, but it also just galvanized my brain to go, do you know what? I think we can do stuff with this. I think we need a plan, and so that's what I bring to.
So when you're working for the PR company,
Yeah.
did it just sort of creep up on you, or was it a realization? Did you realize you were sort of stressed and burnt out, or was that other people who had to point it out to you?
So I could feel some of the symptoms rising because it was quite confusing. I didn't know what it was. This was, I don't know, 15 or so, maybe more years ago. And there wasn't the general conversation around it. It wasn't that. I don't particularly like it, but the TikTok well-being generation, there just wasn't that universal language around it. And so stuff was happening. I didn't know why. A relationship went belly up. I managed to have a difficult time at home for one reason or another. And I just didn't know. I just didn't know who I was and where I was. But I was sort of functioning. I was sort of arriving at work, sort of drinking away the evenings. But nobody, I didn't know what to call it. And it just needed somebody to give me permission to go, you're not yourself. Go and find out where you're at, and then come back and.
I think I remember, sort of working in the 90s. I just think I wouldn't have known what it was, or I wouldn't maybe have even admitted it, because there was this sort of attitude, especially around males and the people you work with around. I don't know. You almost wouldn't say it. It was almost like it was a weakness. There just wasn't that kind of environment to sort of talk out. So, being in the workplace since the 90s, we've come a long way, haven't we? It's a lot to do, but we've come a long way.
We have. When I returned, so I had 3 months off out of work, like unable to function at work properly. It's quite a long time. When I came back 2 weeks later, 2 different people from the agency where I worked came up to me and said, I think, can we have a chat? I think I'm feeling some of the stuff you felt. So I wasn't alone. Yeah, there was no.
And do you think there's a general sort of lack of understanding that people have on how their mental health is affecting their ability to function, and that people see it themselves as a weakness, so they don't want to talk about it? Or are we breaking through those times?
It's getting better, but if I am at work and I am lacking concentration, or I'm not performing like I used to, or I'm having more absence, or I'm being an arse to team members and colleagues or stuff like that, I look very much like a problem. So the workplace is going to go, well, what's he up to? He's the difficult employee. Can we just get rid of him? And not sure about Tom. That stuff still happens, and sometimes it only comes out when we're in sort of a capability or grievance or some other kind of process where I'm in trouble or the trouble has occurred. And that makes it that much harder, because I'm sort of defensive and I don't want to say it and I want to protect my job and I don't know what's happening and all that kind of stuff. So we present as a problem, and so that makes it hard. But when people do reveal their stuff, often, not always, but often, there's somebody in the organization who goes, stop, pause, we know what to do with this, we're on your side, let's come up with a plan. That's what should happen anyway.
I think it's good when somebody does start to talk about it, make themselves vulnerable, which is brave to do, isn't it? And then usually you then get a trail of other people going, oh, I feel like that as well. I feel like that as well. So it's just about starting that conversation sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, getting those first words out. It is brave, because you've got the name for it. Might be stress, anxiety, depression, but you've also got the stuff that's behind it, that's causing it. So my depression might be because I've got a gambling debt. My anxiety might be because I've got, addiction process or something like that. So there's often lots of stuff behind it, and it's not always our stuff either. So it might be that people are carrying the shame and humiliation of a family member who's in trouble, or grief, or divorce, or money, or sleep, or some of this slightly odd stuff that keeps coming up again and again in the surveys that I run. So you got that bit of it as well. So not only have you got to say, I'm not right, I'm not functioning, you've got to sort of disclose what is often quite humiliating and shameful stuff.
Do you think there is still quite a lack of understanding actually about how mental health can affect your ability to sort of function day in, day out? Because I'm just sort of thinking about what it's like to work with other people if you are not in a good place, and how, because things start happening, like, your performance at work isn't as good as you say, sickness as well, you start going off sick more. And either, I mean, I think I know I was in a position like when I went through a difficult time, either I was working too hard, doing too much, doing too many hours and overdoing it, and then suddenly crashing and not being able to do anything. And I kept going in those sort of cycles all the time. But I don't know. I think when other people see you behave that way, do you think there's quite a good understanding from other people of why that is?
Not initially. It's very inconvenient,
Yeah.
actually, when somebody in the team is either going at 99 miles an hour or crashing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite hard to work with that. And you go, what's going on with Shelley? Why is she being like this? And so, all right, that's our instant reaction. And for you as well, you don't want people to know initially. You may not even register this yourself. So you might be trying to mask it, or just press the accelerator and kind of crash on through. And it can be kind of distressing. By the way, I'm not talking about kind of severe end clinical psychosis and big stuff. I'm talking about the kind of stress, anxiety, depression, the common medical conditions that in work, like mild to moderate stuff. Let's all be clear about our lane here. It's not easy for people, basically. So we sort of react to it, and then maybe somebody kind of goes, "Are you all right?" And I'm going to go, "Yes, I'm fine." Why?
Or you cry. You don't need, like, I
Yeah,
did that. I used to do that, like when I am a manager now, but sometimes I just go to somebody, "Are you okay?" And then they're suddenly, they want to say no, and then suddenly they go, "No, I'm not." And it's like, oh, quick, get the tissues, get a cup of tea.
Yeah.
But,
That's pretty good technique, if you ask me. But I think one of the times people end up getting tearful, which is quite good, by the way. Tears full of cortisol helps complete our stress response. It's quite helpful. But very much, you wouldn't do that as a bloke in most workplaces. But once that's happened, then unfortunately, sometimes people go, remember, this is inconvenient. So I'm going to say to you, it's okay. Don't cry. You're fine. And so things that come across as soothing, but don't actually hear out people about what the root of this stuff is. Yeah.
I pulled a stat out today. It's from Mind Charity. They did a survey. It said 60% of employees would feel more motivated and recommend their organisation if good mental health and well-being was part of the culture. So, what's going wrong, and why aren't employees listening?
I think that it often falls into the too complicated pile. People say things like, I don't know if this is their home life or their work life, so how am I supposed to help? Or these young ones, I don't know why we're wrapping them up in cotton wool. I had to do all this. I don't see why they don't have to. So that command and control type thing, or the too complicated part.
Oh, that always reminds me, because that's kind of the new version of now, like, when people, oh, well, I used to, get the cane when I was at school and it didn't do me any harm. That always just sort of reminds me of that, that.
It did, because you're now the sort of person who wants to see children heard.
Yeah, I had to be horribly miserable, so you should have to be as well.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Our world is designed on so a lot of inherited stuff, but you've got a younger generation coming they are, so there'll be Gen Z in the workforce, now, and they haven't had the cane.
That's so
They
scary.
probably never had a bollocking.
Oh,
Some of them, and they've had a lot of choice, a lot of support. It's Generation X's fault if you know look at it really. We gave them medals for taking part, right? And now we're entering into the workforce. 60-year-old male manager with his arms folded, going, "You got to toughen up." Arms crossed. It's really hard to talk about mementals if you get that kind of experience.
I think you just said earlier, you said about resilience, and we sort of slightly kind of said, oh, you've got to get more resilient and so on. But do you think maybe we should start teaching resilience in schools a bit more, or resilience training in the workplace? Because, the workplace is difficult landscape to navigate these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It certainly can be. Some organizations are getting this right, don't get me wrong. But what we actually ought to be doing first is making sure that work is safe for people. And we've done it quite well on the physical safety. We also need to, sorry for the jargon, we need to risk assess on the psychological safety aspects as well. And it doesn't exclude hard work or driven teams or anything like that, but it includes a space where it is safe to speak up. And when I do, I will not be victimized or harassed. Somebody will go, right, thanks for telling me. Let's see what we can do to work this out for you. Because that employee is more likely to be loyal, concentrate better, safer, and they'll stay a lot longer in the organizations. There's loads of really good prizes at the table for firms that get this right.
But whistleblowing is notoriously risky, isn't it, as to an individual?
Yes. Yes, it is, but it shouldn't feel like that. I think the term whistleblowing is really about kind of corporate misdemeanor and that kind of thing. But when people should be able to speak up, or in fact, when they arrive somewhere, they should be able to disclose whether or not they've got a long-term condition, or sit down with a manager and go, this is what I need to work at my best. And people aren't asking for lots. They don't want Fridays off for the rest of their career. It's like people saying things like, I'm left to work alone by myself all day on a machine. I've got ADHD. That's a nightmare. That's a living nightmare for me. Or people who go, I get so many calls from work at evenings and weekends. I want to be with my kids, but I'm in the kitchen hiding in case I burst into tears. Or people saying things like, I'm worried about my pregnancy. This stuff shows up, and in all sorts of different ways. I think what we've got to do is really get curious about what's going on and what those little adjustments might be to somebody so they can work well. And that's really all it is. The health and safety executive, which is the government department responsible for this, expects people to ask their employees where the hotspots are of the stresses and strains at work, about workload and my working relationships and my sense of control, or how change is managed, all that kind of thing. There are about 6 categories, and they expect people to have a plan for it and reduce it in the same way that we would do for noise, dust, slips, trips and falls, carrying boxes, all that kind of stuff. It's the same principle, just across, to mental health.
So what level of support is reasonable for us to expect as employees?
Yeah, okay. So reasonable, it is reasonable for me as an individual, but it's also reasonable for the team I work in, and it's reasonable for the employer. So you can't start demanding contractual changes and stuff like that because you're just having a low couple of weeks. It's got to be kind of relevant to the job you do, and it's got to, adjustments are often kind of short term. And I'll give you an example. I had a taxi driver who said that he normally worked nights, but his wife had depression that was worse in the evenings. So it wasn't even his. His wife had depression. And he said, my controller has put me on days so I can be with my wife in the evenings for the next 6 weeks while she sorts her medication out. And then I'll go back to nights. It's like, right. She just helped that whole household, that whole family. So there are often little tweaks to the working conditions. There's somebody else, she came back from sickness absence, during which time she left her family home and her marriage. It was an abusive relationship. So when I came back to work, I'd taken off my wedding ring, but I just didn't want to tell everybody the story or and so the people on my production line, I like them, but I just wanted to do another job for a week just while I get back into the swing of work, and then I would feel more comfortable telling my colleagues. So it can be really small stuff. There might be others where let's say you're on medication, and so night working is harder. So it's got to be, it's relevant, it's reasonable, it's often short term, while somebody just sort of stabilizes their ship in life.
So yeah, it's about employers almost supporting with an individual approach, isn't it, to each person's circumstances, and then making those arrangements, short to mid time to help them function, because it's far better to help and support someone and come into work than for them not to be able to go and then go off sick and not come into work.
Quite. Yeah. It's very expensive to run your team or your business by just sending everybody off to the doctor. That can be a very good thing to do. Don't stop people from doing that.
No.
But those early stage adjustments where and I started this by talking about, we often see the problem at work, but if we can tune into the person, exactly like you say, we'll often find a way of working through this difficult time. Because life is hard at the moment. So some of the stuff, about 50% of people's mental ill health is a combination of life stuff and work stuff. So sometimes it's just about easing some of the work bit while they sort out the life bit. Other times it's just recognizing that life is giving them a kicking. And so quite understandably, they're not themselves at work. And so back to Shelley's, example, if I see somebody in my team and they're just being unreasonable, they're being off, they're being difficult, it doesn't make any sense. My instinct has got to be like, what is going on in this person's world? Mm-hmm. Because Shelley's normally brilliant.
Yeah.
I am actually.
Yeah, well,
that's not what you say most weeks, Shelley. You have freely admitted on previous shows that you're terrible at your job.
But I'm still a brilliant person, though.
Right, okay, fair enough.
Be around.
That's what we're looking out for. We're looking for changes in people.
Yeah. So if Shelley mysteriously became good, we should be concerned, is what you're saying.
Yeah, if suddenly, I started getting all of my work done instead of talking all the time, you know that there is something wrong.
There is something there about, it's not always about the amount of work that's getting done, it's about behavioural changes and things like that. It's not about performance dropping.
Yeah, I think.
Then ask them how they're keeping.
Yeah, I think unfortunately though, there are, and we all know it, we've all worked for them, a lot of bad managers out there, and they will avoid it, won't they, at any cost?
It is harder if your manager is a brute, no doubt about it. Yeah, but there are things you can do. There might be another manager, there might be somebody even more senior. There might be somebody else who's in an HR role, well-being role, mental health first aider, union. There's all sorts of people who you might go, can I bring you into a meeting with my manager? People always behave differently when there's a third person in the room, and you can try and seek to at least be able to explain. And sometimes we have to coach upwards. Sounds jargony, but it's sort of saying, all right, listen, Jim is an absolute brute, right? And I don't know how to manage this. Look, come in with me. I'll come in with you. Let's prepare what we're going to say. Say, I've got this and I need this. And I'd say, Jim, you can help me be at my best if we just have this little tweak. Right? It doesn't mean that Jim has to do it, but that kind of thing just helps Jim, just because otherwise it's going to be a bit kind of, I don't know.
I think in the workplace, it'd be good to have Toms in workplace, but if you haven't got a Tom, and maybe again the HR might not be overly approachable, it's quite difficult, because in some organizations HR are sometimes there to support the business needs, aren't they, more than the employee needs?
That is also true, Stuart. I like to give people a positive shout, but you can get brutality from HR. I've experienced this a couple of times. One person, I was running a manager training on mental health, and she got out this letter that had been sent by HR declining an extension to her compassionate leave because her father had died in South Africa. And it was just nasty. It was just nasty, this letter. I just thought, oh God, what, if that's your HR team, it's no surprise that people are kind of coming to these sessions and just looking at disbelief at some of the things I'm saying.
So in that
situation,
so if someone wasn't in a union, maybe they could go to like Citizens Advice, or maybe reach out to some charity to get some supporters to help them navigate the way through that situation.
Private counselling, coaching could be pretty effective for short-term stuff. But your doctor is somewhere I'd probably go as well. Now, inevitably, you walk in there and you start saying, I'm low, I can't think straight, I've fallen out with my manager, I don't know what to do, I'm not sleeping, I've got money problems, and the doctor's almost inevitably going to sign you off and offer you pills. The truth is that some people can't afford to be signed off. Because there's limited sickness pay and things like that. So it can be really hard. But there are charities out there. You've got your local wellbeing service. It does take weeks, but they're out there. There's AI. And for those if you're wondering when we're going to mention AI, it's now, because it can operate as people talk about it as an interim therapist. It's there. It's quite positive. It's quite upbeat. It's based on modern stuff. Not your tends not to be the 65-year-old folded armed manager, and it can be helpful. ADHD coaches, all sorts of things you can do through that. But again, people kind of want another human. And that's what they want. Sort of that.
I suppose if you're in a business or a workplace which is so toxic, I know it's difficult. You've got to get out, haven't you? You've got to
ultimately, Stuart. If you can find any choice in this, because it's that it's not bleeding and there's no bruises and breaks, but this is injury. This is workplace injury when this goes. I'm not trying to say that most people are mostly fine most of the time. Okay, so I'm not trying to scaremonger.
No, but some when people get injured, they seriously get injured.
People when you severe burnout episodes can be life altering, and if we can just land the point that stress is not a mental health condition, it's a physiological condition. Things happen in me when I get stressed, actual things to do with my heart rate, my liver, my adrenal glands, and cortisol and that kind of thing. And it's real. And
left untreated, you can get very ill, can't you?
Yeah, right. It's like over revving your engine, rev it, and at some point something's gonna blow. And sometimes the body drops us, and we call these breakdowns, but it's Mother Nature or Brother Nature, whoever, saying to us, I'm going to take over here. You're out. And sometimes people look back on those times and see them as a breakthrough, because it forces an intervention from them to reassess their life or their workplace to go, oh right, it is actually serious, this one.
And also to sort of learn the lessons of early indicators as well, so you can act early as well, so it doesn't build up over weeks and months and so on. Recognizing that in yourself when you do become feeling stressed, that's important as well.
I was just thinking about actually some of the things you were saying about the difficult manager or the difficult HR, and it just made me think about when in some cases as a manager you can actually be trying to do the right thing for people, but actually you end up under pressure from your organization to be hard on them. I mean, is that because I mean, I ignore it. I think, well, actually, I'm following policies and guidelines that have been put into place in the organization. But, I have actually had said about me that Shelley needs to understand that she can't be everybody's friend when I'm actually just doing what I think is making reasonable adjustments to support my staff.
It's tough, isn't it? I used to work for a financial services organization, and there was part of the training about financial conduct was, would you be okay if this was made public? And my version of that is, would you be okay if this was, your actions were being read out to a tribunal judge?
Oh, I'm writing
that
one down.
Benchmark. It's quite a nice benchmark. They do
going in the notes.
while we're on the subject, anything that you write against somebody's name could be called out as evidence in the event of a tribunal. So don't slag people off. But they say, like, dance like no one's watching, but email like a judge is reading it out.
Yeah. And banter usually ends up in the tribunal court, doesn't it?
Can be. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I hope that our pod doesn't go to a tribunal.
That's really interesting. Now, I'm not going to use the words now, but if I was slagging off somebody on the basis of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation, it'd be very obvious that would be unwelcome and possibly unlawful in the workplace. But we're still saying things like woke, lefty, snowflake, that kind of thing, which is essentially rolling your eyes, playing the stress card, that kind of thing.
And they're kind of microaggressions, aren't they?
Yeah.
Which you need to look out for as well, because over time, built up, they can be just as harmful, can't they?
Yeah. As someone has a long-term condition, it counts as a de facto disability. So legally, it could be harassment on the grounds of disability. So you got, I think when banter comes up, some teams are built on banter.
Yeah.
Manufacturing environment, groups working together, high pressure, and banter is important. But there is a stage as a manager, if you keep seeing it, and you need to kind of sometimes get involved to say, that thing is not, I'm not comfortable with it, and I don't really want to see that, hear that in the team. Culture is defined by the worst tolerated behaviors. And if you
that's a great goal.
If you're letting it go because we're all taking a piss out of Tom because of his anxiety or making cuckoo noises about mental health and that kind of thing, then that's you say that's okay. In some organizations, that happens repeatedly. You could easily lose your job for doing it. Or somebody in reception, anybody in your workplace. It can be quite strong, this stuff. It just doesn't happen loads and loads.
No.
But it starts to matter when things get serious for people, because a lot of people have thought about hurting themselves, or from time to time, or try to, and or indeed take their own lives. And if your workplace is one where people are just kind of going cuckoo and laughing about it, and it's not safe to speak up, where do you go if you're thinking the most serious stuff? And everybody goes, oh, it's such a great tragedy, if somebody were to hurt themselves. And indeed it would be, but this is your culture and your sense of psychological safety is really important to people to be able to disclose the big stuff.
I mean, some people say, well, it's only just work. But, if you've got, as you say, like a brute of a boss, he's got that control over you. You need that job to pay your gas bill or feed your kids and so on. So this is real stuff, isn't it? Every day that you have to go through. So, it's about, like, say, building the resilience, understanding where to go and calling it out. I have hope that this is shifting in workplaces, and we have managed to largely halt the increase in a lot of physical safety areas. So we know it's possible.
And although mental health absence and incidences are still on the rise, I think over time and generations we will start to get this right. And we're going to need to turn our attention to it anyway. Mental health related absence accounts for 53% of our lost time. So if I told you there was a machine that was losing you 50% of your working time, you'd sure as whatnot.
Let's fix it.
Fix it, do root cause analysis. You'd probably tell your leadership team you wouldn't use it again until it was right.
You think that might actually be higher as well in some ways, because that's only what's been declared, isn't it? Because some people will say, "Oh, I've got a virus or something," when actually, really, what they're feeling is too depressed or anxious, or they haven't slept and things. And there'll be other things that are, so they're actually saying, "Oh, I'm actually physically ill," when really, that might not be the case. So in some ways, that number could be a little bit higher.
Yeah, it could be. 1 in 5 or 6 people give a different reason for their absence often. Or we call it mental health, but there are physical things that come as a result of it. My stress might make my endometriosis worse. My depression might affect my bad back. There are other links. I might be drinking more, so I'm taking up different times, here and there, and so things like that can come out.
Is there any sort of data on like bringing in first aiders, mental health first aiders? Does that help at all? Like having allocated people in a business people can go to, or
so the 2 things that business need to do, we've covered one of them, which is prevent work-related stress, anxiety, depression in the first place. And the other thing we do is we need to support people, which is the territory we're in now. When your manager is proactively supporting on well-being, we can reduce incidences of mental health by up to 80%. 80.
That's staggering, isn't it?
It's absolutely astonishing. So I did this piece of work with a factory environment, not a white collar officey type thing, a factory environment. And I asked the question, does your manager proactively support your well-being? And then we looked at the data later on about, have you experienced poor mental health in the last 12 months? And so I could cut the data in different ways. And for those teams where there's proactive support, it reduced to 80%. Like the numbers just plummeted. So managers, they've got a role. Mental health first aiders can be good. My warning light there is that they sometimes take the conversation away from the manager. That's sometimes a good thing. And if Janet in accounts stops somebody in the loo because they're in tears, it's all right. We can all have a role to play here. We've got good HR person, leadership showing up. I probably wouldn't say, this phrase, my door's always open. Let's stop saying that. I don't want your door to be open. I want but leaders they can turn up to events, they can share their story, they can talk about how they manage this stuff as well. And then you got your HR team, and so there's roles for lots of people, and your colleague next to you
as well. Everyone getting involved and just to help to normalize it, really, like it's a normal thing.
When it comes up. What I would say is that people don't love talking about mental health all the time. You've got jobs to do and you've got that sort of stuff. But so if I was to say something, you have people who have that instinct of compassion around me. Go, oh yeah, great. Thanks for letting us know. How can we help? That's what we get. So there's lots of promise in some workplaces. When it goes well, it goes very, very well. But right now, about half people aren't telling anybody. And so
as an employer, who wouldn't want that 80% reduction though? Who wouldn't want that?
Well,
it's a massive
and staff retention as well.
For sure.
What a pain it is when people keep leaving all the time, and sometimes you might then lose the post as well, because if the organisation you're working for is in financial difficulty, you've then got to try. If someone leaves, they might not refill that post again. So you have to really look after people and value them, because actually, if they go, that's it. You could have lost them. So you've got to sort of have, you do have to have care for your staff.
I'm writing that one down because that's
Yeah.
a dimension that, that's a lot of that is happening, isn't it? With the massive,
Yes.
that slow downsizing of, roles.
Oh, good. I feel like I've earned some of the things that I've written down now because I exchanged an idea.
It does cost a load of money though. 300,000 people lose or leave their jobs in the UK with mental health playing a major role.
Yeah.
And it's really expensive to recruit, but you've got that bit before people leave where they're not performing and then taking up management time and they're in and out of work and that kind of stuff. And it's very distressing for them and it's very costly to an organisation.
Yeah, you've got to do everything you can. So,
well, I try and sell my courses at the back. That you can make more money and you can save more money and you can feel good and you can not break the law by doing this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's always the good thing, isn't it? Not
you'd hope they're quite good drivers, but yeah.
Jim, I hope you're taking notes. I sort of see him as our manager in this podcast.
I'm not your manager.
So Tom, how would people access your courses? Do you have a website?
Yeah. I've got the Bamboo Mental Health, and I've got a TEDx talk out there, and it's creeping up to 1 million views, which is nice. And
how do we find that? Just put in Tom Oxley.
Yeah, if you put no, Stuart. Do you know what? There's another Tom Oxley that's done a TEDx talk. It's better than mine about reading your thoughts through a spinal thing or something. It's unbelievable. Good chances. Anyway,
I'm going to be listening to that one.
Anyway, mine is about workplace mental health.
Okay.
Yeah, and mine is about workplace mental health.
A little spate because I worked in marketing for a little while, and I've also done a little bit of writing on the side. But there is a chap called Professor Jim Blythe who has books out there on marketing, and people who just had a few details about me were Googling and deciding this must be me, Professor Jim Blythe. I mean, he is about 30 years older than me for a start. So if you had just had a look, you might have got an indication. But
well, maybe it's, I do wonder if people have accidentally booked me or thinking it was the other guy. And somebody said
their disappointment when you turn up.
People, do you know what? People do say you're a lot taller than I imagined. I wonder if that's why. But
can you?
You're a lot less spiritual than I thought you'd be.
Can you help me
write
with
an article?
Back? Yeah, can you?
I do to check. Yeah, I have to check. And somebody said, "Can you write this article about brains or something?" I said, "No, of course not. I'm not the one. I'm not the Tom Oxley you want." And he sort of paused. He said, "Do you give it a go anyway?" I'm not going to do that.
Give it a go.
It's way out of my zone.
Brilliant. Just give it a go. No one will notice. That'll be fine.
Fancy a bit of moonlighting, then, Tom. That opportunity is there.
Maybe.
There was a point we were getting a lot of spam phone calls to the home phone back when that was a thing. So we got our phone number changed. We ended up with the number of someone who the previous guy had. It must have been a plumber. And I used to get all these LDs phoning me asking me to service their boiler. And after a while, having got tired of saying this isn't Keith's and trying to explain how this wasn't Keith's number anymore, you think, maybe I should just have a go. I mean, just turn up with my toolbox and vacuum cleaner and have a little fiddle. And then,
I mean, what could the risk be?
Take £80 and bugger off. They never know.
Carbon monoxide poisoning.
Where's the audit trail? No one would ever know. But I mean, I didn't, and you probably shouldn't start writing about brains, Tom. I don't know.
I don't think so. I do. One of the really good thing for burnout prevention is to do different things in your life that aren't to do with work and value them.
So I should have serviced those boilers, you're saying?
Well, maybe who knows? Giving it a crack. How many call-out fees do you reckon you could have got before anyone would have noticed? Anyway,
that does make sense. It's like having things that you're not just about your job. because we have to spend so much of our time at work, don't we? And because I realize that, like, sometimes through the whole week, all I seem to have ended up, like, when I'm doing my laundry at the weekend, all I've been wearing is like pajamas or my uniform, because I've literally not done anything other than get up, go to work, come home, put my pajamas on. And so yeah, it would be nice to think actually I did wear something else in a week, so because I was doing something other than just working and coming home, and then just being really tired at the weekend.
That's a very interesting observation. You're in that performance zone, drawing down from the bank of your energy resources, and it's often good to have things that are just outright nourishing and not to do with what you do at work. And
I think when I've had tough times at work, I probably started doing it about 6-7 years ago. I sort of formed my own meditation. So I wasn't interested in, sort of kind of looking at a book and breathing and all that kind of thing.
You're not interested in breathing.
No, sort of, you've got to do certain breaths, and so what I sort of devised was I just lay still, and for about 15-20 minutes, and I let the thoughts just come into my head, and then I really try hard not to engage with them. So I'm aware of everything that I'm thinking of. And as soon as I sort of engage, I pull myself back. And I think I spoke to Jim about it before. I sort of liken it to like a lighthouse with the waves crashing in to the lighthouse, and they sort of crashing in, and I get the thoughts, and then they fall back again. And I just do that for about 15-20 minutes if I'm sort of having a bit of a tough time or feeling really stressed out or anxious. It does really help. So I think if you can find something like that, it doesn't cost any money, you don't need a book. It's just about taking time out, just disconnecting, isn't it? Just giving yourself some time.
Yeah, calming for the brain, and it goes into something called the default mode network, and it repairs, it restores, it does some really brilliant things if you give it a bit of a rest, if you daydream, if you meditate, if you
I suppose it
it
is sort of daydreaming. Initially it was hard to do because you sort of feel a bit restless and want to get up and do all things, but no, I sort of just forced myself to 20 minutes, and then after a while I got better at it, of like just not engaging, because sometimes when you're like stressed out or worried, you tend to ruminate quite a lot and just keep going over and over and over, and it wears you out, doesn't it? And then
exhausting.
And then you're almost not achieving anything. If anything, you're making it worse, because you're like then starting to go into catastrophe mode almost, aren't you? And everything seems a lot worse. So, if you can try and disconnect, I do think that's helpful and useful.
Yeah.
It's to me anyway.
Yeah, it's good research to say that long-term meditation can reduce the activity and sometimes some papers say the size of the amygdala, which is the bit of your brain that goes off in the fight or flight response, aka stress.
Yeah.
And so anything you can do to give yourself time out of stress zone and into the flow state, which is where time sort of goes by. It's a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
And it could be Argentinian tango. It could be Lego.
Yeah.
It could be meditation. It could be crafting. It could be, there's quite a few things that could do. You could find yours.
Yeah.
I like cooking. I run a supper club for strangers.
Brilliant.
And in my home. And I find flow shopping and menu planning and then cooking.
That's interesting.
Pretty done in by the time guests arrive.
Yeah, a supper club for strangers.
Yeah.
Does anyone ever complain?
They haven't. No, they just haven't come by.
Are most people quite nice?
Yes, and for some people, it's the thing that they get out of their house to do.
Yeah.
They don't wear their pajamas often. And they might put on a frock or whatever, or just go and have a different conversation, hear some new voices, some new faces. 9:30, they're back in home, tucked up with their novel by 10 o'clock if they want to.
Because when we first started this, Jim, didn't we? We had an initial conversation about putting this podcast together, just for those sort of reasons, really. Just to, it's a good thing to do, isn't it, for the three of us to meet every week, and we plan it and we have a think about it, and we seriously, want it to do well, and we, how can we get it out there, and it gives us something else to focus on and concentrate outside, work and family commitments and all that other stuff that goes on. Well, it was Jim said, well, why don't we, whilst we're doing it, let's think about positive things we can do as well while we're doing it. But I think, we do enjoy doing it as well. So, it's good to find something, like you said, Sup Club can be anything, can't it? Whatever you're interested. Some people like going to gyms and sport. I don't personally. When people say about, the exercise, we all know exercise is really good for you, but at the same time, I just know that I won't always do it. I'll try, but if there's other things you can do as well, then that's a good thing, isn't it? Because I know, Jim, you do a bit of running now, don't you? So
I do, and as I said before, I don't massively enjoy running, but what I do enjoy is for that hour or half an hour, whichever length of run I'm doing, that's some time for me. Generally, I listen to a podcast, something like that. It's a good way to rest my brain and take me out of all that other stuff that I do. So to go and do that every, most days, is something that is quite useful for me. And it's shed, about 2 stone of weight this year as well, which is nice.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? You sort of feel better about yourself as well, don't you? You're healthier, so
yeah, absolutely.
They're all the positives on the back of that, aren't
Do
they?
you want to hear something positive? If you like your positive stuff, then
We love positive stuff, Tom.
community stuff like social interaction and social integration has better long-term health outcomes than not smoking.
Yeah, for sure.
So
you can smoke.
I definitely didn't say that.
So getting your friends together into a smoking club.
So just for the record, edit that out. I didn't say that, but things like we think that it's things like exercising and not being obese and not smoking and those things are still good for you, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
do try and give up the fags. But on the other hand, I think I've heard of people who their psychiatrists have said, for goodness sake, don't stop smoking. It's getting you through at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, no, you've got to pick the time, haven't you? You can't just suddenly take all of the crutches you need away. If you're like at rock bottom. So I'm sorry, suddenly, I think what you need to do is go on a diet, stop drinking alcohol and stop smoking. Well, at that moment, when you're absolutely, grief-stricken or whatever, no, don't. You've got to sort of, let's try and, heal the pain. And then you can start working on other little things, but also there's no point in it actually advising anything like help, like exercise and diet, unless it's something that people are going to be able to stick to.
As is, you get there's a version of this which is toxic well-being, which is, why don't you just go for a 10K, or why don't you have a broccoli smoothie, or why don't you ring my therapist? And and it's people just a bit kind of like, I know this stuff. I'm actually just having a shit time at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you hear me out on that? Can you just be with me? Can you just give me a bit of flex while I just level out a bit? And then, then we'll come back to the crochet club or whatever it is later.
Yeah.
And sleep, movement, and good food are always good for us. But they're sometimes really inaccessible when we're just going through a difficult time, or we haven't got the resources, financial time, or anything like that to do. So you've got to be really careful not to be judgy about what other people are doing. And sometimes it's getting them through. It's getting them through.
Yeah, I think. I'm really quite lucky to have some really good friends, and they're not going to fix my problems. They're not going to. Necessarily have the answers or anything, but they are just going to be there. And sometimes it won't even be about talking about what's like wrong with me. It'll just be them. One thing I do really appreciate, I don't know if this is something that's really strong about female friends, is that like some of them will come and childishly slag someone off with me. It's so cathartic. It's just like, we'll just turn into children, like nasty little schoolgirls behind everyone's back, of course, but and it's so ridiculous, and the stuff we say, and it's not going to help anything at all. It really isn't. But do I feel better? Yes, I do.
I'm glad I don't work with you, Shelley. You sound like one of those people in the workplace who kind of, talk behind everyone's back.
Yeah, I'm quite good. I've like with one of my friends I used to work with, we were very good at doing the look at each other.
Right.
If you were like in a meeting or something,
Mm.
and that person was doing that, saying that thing, and we would both just sort of throw a really quick glance at each other.
You do know, Shelley, that's a microaggression, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Just so you know.
But to bring this away from some
I
of
think
Shelley's
that I was
habits,
the problem.
back to this thing, because Tom, you said about community and the importance of community,
Yeah.
and this is an interesting one because this has come up actually now a number of times over the course of the stuff we've done. So this is our 8th episode. Before that, we recorded, I think, sort of 4 or 5 practice goes, and we found news items around communities coming together and the positive impact this had.
Yeah.
We've had conversations about the power of sports fans and things like that, of going and supporting a team and things like that, and being in that community, being in that tribe. And it just constantly seems to be coming up as being a really important, powerful thing for our well-being.
Yeah. There's some good data around on coming together, getting outside, being with other people. We don't like being lonely and left on our own. Physiologically, we feel less safe. And there was a research experiment in Chicago in the 1970s, and if you were participating, you had to write down what was going on at random points during your life and day, and then measure your heart rate, and you spit into a test tube to measure your cortisol, so how stressed you are. And the researchers discovered that you could be as physiologically stressed if you were chronically lonely as if you were attacked in the street by a random stranger.
That's a big impact, isn't it?
So
Wow.
yeah, the stress and that sort of that sense of trauma, which is the effect of a stressful event on the body, in non-head injury terms, that it can be an obvious single overwhelming event that everyone can see and I can describe, but it can also be a very quiet, layered, subtle, backgroundy, complex thing as well.
Ironically, on that though, when people are depressed, they tend to isolate themselves, don't they? And that's the one thing that's probably not doing them any good. So I think, if friends start to pull away or disappear, just got to keep engaging, haven't you? Even if they don't reply.
You notice that across mental health, some of them anyway. So if I'm stressed, my instant reaction is to work more.
Right.
If I'm depressed, I might isolate. If I'm anxious, I might start to kind of worry and threaten. So we often, unfortunately, do things that exacerbate it, which is why when we have somebody professional to work with, and I do recommend that, there's a limit on what we can do as friends and as managers. Getting professional advice is always very good. To come up with that plan, we do a bit of emptying that Shelley described. I can rant a bit. It's good. It's not great to rant all the time. A long-term ranting means you sort of stay in the problem, but get it out, empty it. Right, feel better now. Right, what's the plan? What's going to help you? Have you gone through this before? What did you do then? What can I do to support you? So we're not trying to take the problem off the individual because they own it. Empathy is going, right, I think I get how you feel. What do you need from me? Do you know what you need? What's the best thing I can do for you? Do you know what it is that you need of us at work and things like that? Those kind of questions are really helpful, and it gives me a sense of purpose and plan. And
you sort of talked about community. I run a team of volunteers, got 30 volunteers, and from students up to the oldest one who's nearly 80, and there is some data out there, isn't there, about volunteering and giving back. It does actually make you feel better, doesn't it? There's some strong data out there. And then people come together, they feel important, they feel valuable, don't they? Feel part, as Jim said, part of the tribe. So, things like volunteering are really good for you, aren't they?
Yeah, I reckon. So I think when we used to do that run a volunteering program, there was some data that it reduced absences in workplaces where teams did volunteering.
Mm.
And other little magical things happen. You're painting a fence next to that person who previously you were just kind of giving the eye, and in the meeting, side eyeing, and you get to learn that there's troubles at home, or there's some financial thing, or they've got different layers to them that you just never realised, or you both like, bareback horse riding or improvisation or whatever it might be, and you've got find some common stuff. I can be really good for teams, particularly merged teams that don't know each other and fear each other like tribes in the
I just wanted to come back. You said, when you're stressed, you tend to work harder and more. Do you think some people are more susceptible to that, or I mean, I don't know about ADHD, but do people say ADHD, maybe neurodiverse? Is that a coping mechanism specific to that, or is that just depends on the individual? We all deal with it differently.
Yeah, it's an individual thing, and I'm certainly not qualified to talk about data around neurodiversity.
Sure.
But we all have our own personal algorithm as to how we approach life and things and stressful moments. So it's going to be a bit of a combination lock of who I am, what's happening, how I was brought up, who the big influences are, my emotional situation at home, my resources, my time, my money, my access to things in order to get me through. So that's why coaching, counseling can help us learn that kind of thing. But there's no doubt that when I've gone through difficult times, having somebody by your side makes it that much easier. And if you guys are finding it with the podcast, then I think that's worth celebrating. We probably have got more community in us than we think. It might be a sports team, volunteering, church, mosque, choir, gaming. They're out there, and I think that's a really good place for people to start. Yeah, I think doctors call it social prescribing, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, that's social prescribing is really interesting new kind of approach. I think it's been around for the last few years, and they actually have a social prescriber in lots of GP surgeries, and they will just kind of help people with all of the things that like the doctor or the nurse can't really help them with, and it's kind of like almost somewhere between a social worker as well and just like but they will sort out things like actually helping people who are lonely and helping them to get into, like, I don't know, like take up hobbies or find interests and things around, it also can find affordable ways for people to keep fit, but they'll also do practical things as well, like helping people with their, like, sort out their finances. And yeah, it's I think it was quite I think it's quite a good idea. It was just fills in that gap that's missing in lots of, like, in healthcare a lot of the time. It's quite hard to get in to see the social prescriber, I do understand. I was just gonna also just ask though, sort of just going back to like the workplace and also sort of like aiming more towards like this is my more positive question really. Have you seen any workplaces, like say after you've been to see them and you've spent some time, have you seen any of them implement any really good strategies or come up with anything new that's actually really made a difference?
Yes, this is not, I'm not going to take all the claim for this, but the things that some really nice activities that I think are shareable is there's one I did a review on, and they had an HR team that just used to go through and look at the absence recording, and any individual who had 2 or 3 absences in the past sort of month, they'd just get in touch with them from a welfare check. So this was very, very clearly not an HR discipline check. It was a welfare check.
Mm.
Lovely little example. Try and get those problems early. Another example was a factory environment where they stopped the lines every Friday afternoon, like so that bit between the shifts, and they gave people tea and biscuits, terribly British, and they said there's one rule: you're not allowed to talk about work.
Oh, that sounds good.
Nice. Another
Yeah.
one where everybody who joins the organization, they fill out something called a wellness action plan, so that you ask questions about how you work well and well-being, and into that you can put in your best practices for things like, how I work with my ADHD or my autism stuff, or my reproductive health, or whatever it might be. It goes into their well-being passport that they can take between jobs and departments and that kind of thing, and managers. Nice. So not loads and loads of money. Manager training is still a good way to spend your budget, but there are some other things as well. Oh, one I will tell you about, because I love it. It's up my street because it involves food. This group of people working in highways and fixing roads at night for a living, and hard under
Yeah.
fixing central reservations, in the night, bollards and flashing lights, that kind of thing. And they said, we want to do something well-being. I said, all right, yeah, feed them. He went, no, I'm not doing that. I'm tired. I'm driving home from well-being events with a bunch of boxes of apples in the back of my car that nobody wants. So maybe not apples. And we came up with Curry Club. So we got them together, and we got a bunch of takeaway curries, and they sat down and they chomped their way through their naans and their rice and their curries. And I gave a talk, and then we had somebody in from East Anglian Air Ambulance, one of the medics in the helicopter, talking about their mental health. Whew, some big stuff came out there, and
Wow.
they previously kind of folded arms, nothing to do with me, this subject type people, then started to dig under the surface a little bit and share some of their stuff around mental health. So
Yeah, because
there
you
are
can't
different ways of doing
be.
it.
Oh, sorry, I'm really terrible for doing that. I always think I can start talking when I shouldn't. I just think though, like your colleagues can be such good allies, can't they? If you can actually get that connection with them. So
Yeah.
something like that is like actually giving people to see the people they work with in a slightly different light.
Oh yeah. Work can definitely be a community and can often hold people together during really difficult times. So work can be part of people's recovery. Or indeed, if somebody's going through a difficult time, let's say I'm going through a separation, divorce, I haven't got 100% to give you. But if you can keep 50% of me, or 60%, I can come in and I can see people, and I have that sense of esteem, and I can, while I'm looking for a house, while I'm seeing solicitors, all that, you can do some really good stuff. And for a lot of people who experience poor mental health would much rather be at work and would much rather be well.
You just want to be normal. You want to feel
Yeah,
normal, don't you? You're
yeah,
not laying at home having fun. You're laying at home feeling ill. So,
yeah, that's it. And
mm,
actually, though, if you were, just as a point here, Shelley, if people are signed off with poor mental health, let's say 2 weeks a month, it's actually quite important that they do try and have some fun, and they do get out and about, and they do their paddle boarding or their book group or their whatever it is, because actually it's very good for to balance out your mental health. It's our assumption, it's quite old fashioned, but it's still out there, is that people, if you're off sick, you need to be in bed,
yeah.
thermometer out of your mouth and a bandage around your head before it counts. Mental health just doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't.
And yeah, and
Yeah, you're not going to recover if you stay shut indoors the whole time.
no,
So,
it may have been your doctor's prescription to get out and about.
mm,
So so it's worth, if people are off and well, while they're unwell, I recommend that managers do try and stay in touch with them. Not texting every 5 minutes, say when you're back.
Yeah, are you better yet? Are you better yet?
Yeah, all that. But
We're
to say,
really
you know,
struggling
shall
here.
we stay in touch? Shall we stay in touch? Send a card from the team. We're all thinking about you.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
all right.
I think it's just a sort of, because I think if you don't have any contact with them at all as well, like you're completely leaving them alone, they don't really know how to get back in and how it's going to be to return to work if you don't have any contact, if you just sort of isolate people. So it is, finding that balance of being supportive without harassing someone because really you're desperate and you just want them to come back. But that's not their problem. That's you know, as a manager, that's your problem. You can't make it your member of staff's problem.
No, you need a plan for when people come back. So
I
interviewed somebody who'd been off for a couple of weeks with work-related stress. The team knew it because they were looking after her work, and said that first morning back, I walked into the doors and there was literally a queue of people was formed at my desk waiting to give me the work back that they'd been looking after. So nobody even asked me how I was. I was signed off again within an hour.
Yeah.
Have a plan. Have a plan. Just to be a bit more humane. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, in that situation they needed good support from their manager to protect them from something like that as well. So
yeah, that's it. We're into the realms of manager training here. But what I would perhaps lastly say is that as a parting positive shot is that when you get this right, the ripple effect is magnificent, right? It goes through not just your employee, it goes through the household, it goes through their relationships, their kids know it, and other people in the team see it, and it's like, oh right, we can get this right. And it feels great when there's somebody who shows up for you when life gives you the boot. And I think that's something we really need to remember. Because it really feels good to get this right, as well as saving you money and helping performance and meeting your legal compliance. It feels really good and it's worth doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. That's been a really fascinating chat. Thank you ever so much for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, can I just say thanks, Tom? Also, it's a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom.
Pleasure.
We appreciate you giving up your time. Thank you for listening, assuming you have been. If you enjoyed this pod, or at least you didn't hate it, please like, please subscribe, please follow, please share, please do all those things that people always beg you to do at some point in their podcasts. We will leave it there. And just remember, for another week, everything's fine. Probably.